All right. Here we are again. It's very, very late on a Monday night in early November of 2025. I'm reminded of that song from the early 60s. In the year 2525, nary a man was still left alive. Da 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 da. Something like that. I think it was the Associations. Might have been the band that did that song. Perhaps we don't know how close to the truth of that song we are. How many of us will be still left alive in the year 2525? Which, of course, that would be exactly 500 years from now. At the rate we're going, I would say there's a slim chance that very many of us will still be alive, given all of the horrific things that are going on in this world today. But that's not the purpose of my talk this evening. The focus of my talk this evening is this violin right here. It is a violin which was made by a man who is now deceased. He's been dead for a long time. His name was Eugene Deuits. We just called him Gene, of course. Deuits. I believe that's a Dutch name. And has a funny spelling. Let's see. He spells his name Deuits. 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 He pronounced it Deuits. Eugene Deuits, St. Louis, Missouri. 1993 is when he made this violin. The backstory to this violin, of course, is something we will discuss right now. He was a retired old man, lived in South St. Louis, a very humble existence. He had been he had several different jobs throughout his adult career, but one of his main jobs for many years was as a butcher in the meat department at one of the main grocery chains in St. Louis. I believe it was called a National Food Store, and I think he may have also worked for the chain which is called Kroger, which used to have a presence in St. Louis. I don't think either National or Kroger are still in existence in St. Louis, Missouri to this day. But back when Gene Deuits was in the meat of his career, pun intended, the meat of his career, he was a union butcher, a meat man, working back in the butcher department at these grocery stores. Spending long hours slicing up large carcasses of beef and pork into steaks and ribs and other kinds of meat intended for retail sale in the butcher departments. And of course, back in those days, a lot of people would go to the butcher department at the back of the store, and they would request custom cuts of meat. It was very common for people to especially the mothers of the households, who were the main cooks back in that foregone time. We're talking the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, or 40s, 50s, 60s. My own mother did that all the time. She had her favorite butcher shop in St. Louis, and we were a heavily carnivorous family when I was growing up. And she would, we were pretty well off, so my mom was able to buy the finest cuts of beef, steaks, beef tenderloin, and so forth and so on. Finest cuts of meats that money could buy back in those days. So, and she would have those cut up for her personally. She would choose the meat herself. The butcher would bring her cuts of meat, and they would talk about it and discuss it, and so forth and so on. And she would have the meat prepared for her on a custom sort of basis. Very common thing amongst certain people back in those days. Now, Gene was he was a career butcher, and quite handy with the blade. After he retired, and after he got into him like around in his early 70s, I think he somehow got the notion to investigate violin making. And there was a violin shop in South St. Louis, only, I don't know, just 3 or 4 miles from Gene's house where he lived. And it was the shop of a man by the name of Jeff Seitz. I believe he opened that shop in, let's see, that had to have been about 1992, 91 or 92. I believe he used to work out of his house a little bit before that, but eventually got a little storefront in South St. Louis. And he hired me. Ultimately, I started in an apprentice capacity there, learning violin making and learning repair and bow repairs and so forth under his tutelage. And back in those days, after Eugene Deuits got bitten by the violin making bug, so to speak, he sought out the expertise of Jeff Seitz and asked Jeff if he would help him, to teach him how to make violins, pure and simple. Well, Jeff was willing to do that up to a certain point. He didn't have a lot of extra time to take on any kind of apprentices, or certainly not to do any formal, teaching of the trade, on any long term basis that would consume too many of his hours, because his time was much more taken up running the shop, making his own violins, and just running the whole business with the sales and repairs and everything else. But he apparently made a bit of an exception for Gene and decided to show him some things. Probably only consumed, a few hours a week or something of that kind. What Gene ended up doing was buying some violin making kits. And this violin here was actually made from a kit. Where he bought this kit, I do not know. But it was one of these kits where the plates are not fully graduated. They're left quite thick, and they're only just very vaguely cut to the shape of a violin pattern. It is there were no F holes cut in the top. There was a neck, but it was very roughly hewn. It needed to be carved down and shaped, and the peg box needed to be cut out, and holes needed to be drilled, and pegs fit. So there was but the kit gave you the basic parts of the violin all in one package, so to speak. There were several companies that were selling kits like this back around the 1980s or 90s. I'm not sure where Gene got this particular kit. The wood is not spectacular, but there is some pretty attractive curl to this to the choice of curly maple that was included in this particular kit. The spruce in the top actually has kind of a nice look to it, strangely enough. So he made a violin with the parts from this kit, and one of the most this is one of his earlier violins. I think he made one or two before this one. The most difficult of all the procedures in making a violin, of course, is one of the most difficult is setting the neck into the body of the instrument. You have to have a certain angle to the neck. You have lateral issues to deal with. You can't set the neck in and have the fingerboard to, end up cattywampus over this way. That's going to screw everything up. The neck should have a bit of a lean to it, a lean this way. The whole fingerboard should lean a bit, just slightly to the treble side. At least that's how I was taught, and so forth and so on. So there's a block of wood inside the violin here, into which the heel of the neck is mortised into the block. And it takes a lot of skill to perfect fitting a neck into a body of a violin. Jeff helped him with that part quite a bit. In fact, he did most of the work of fitting this neck into the body. When Gene was done with the violin, of course, Jeff left it up to him to varnish it. When I first saw this violin, it was the color, the whole violin was about the color of, like if you use a big plastic tub and you wash your dishes in the tub and then put the clean dishes in the rack to dry. The color, you can sort of picture the color of the water that's left in the tub from doing the dishes. That was about the color of the varnish of Gene's varnish on this violin, with a slight. It was kind of a strange tan color, but with a slight pinkish cast sort of mixed into the tan. And I'll be damned if we all didn't concur that it very much resembled the color of uncooked pork chops, depending upon what cut you might have bought from the store. We've all seen just standard pork chops where the meat has a certain weird sort of color, that it's kind of flesh colored, somewhere between flesh and tan and so forth. And that was the color of Gene's varnish on this violin. And so when he brought that fiddle back over to Jeff to do the big unveiling, Jeff became quite enamored of it, actually. And he actually offered to buy it from Gene, mostly as an encouragement to keep Gene. He didn't give him that much money. I think he might have given Gene, $300 or $400 for the fiddle. And Gene, of course, that was a thrill for Gene. By then he was about 75 or 77 years old. And he could now go around saying that, he was a violin maker, and that he was selling his fiddles to people. It was a thrill for him. He was a character, man. This dude, old Eugene Deuits. He'd come down and hang out with us at the shop. Just pull up a stool, like a bar stool, and sit in between Jeff's bench and my bench while we worked. And he would just sit there and just chat with us and tell us weird stories about his time in the business, in the butchering business, his time during the war, what happened during the Second War, when he was, I believe he was in the Navy, actually. He was a trip, man. Sometimes he'd make us lunch, and he'd like both Jeff and I were pretty, Renaissance men. Eat a lot of organic, and some pretty. When we go out to a restaurant, we go to some pretty fine. Back in those days, we'd patronize the fine Italian restaurants, of which there were many in St. Louis, especially up on the part of town called the Hill. Lots of great old Italian restaurants, and oh my goodness, we were no strangers to some of the joys of finer eating. But Gene would come in, and he'd have see, what were the things that he made for us? He brought in some a big old can of like little Vienna sausage. He dump it into this giant like casserole pot, and then he'd dump in a bunch of some kind of noodles, the pre-made noodles, from a can, and then maybe some a can of mixed vegetables. Dump it all in there together and mix it all up, and then put it on our little hot plate where we cook our glue in the shop, where we kept our hide glue warm, and he would he would whip us up a nice lunch, and we'd all fill up a bowl, and we eat whatever he brought us. We would eat, and God, it was just he was so strange, but so much fun. He was so great. He used to know some of the. He used to know one of the wrestling superstars in the wrestling days. They used to have. There was a hotel in St. Louis, still there, but in the ballroom, this big ballroom at the hotel, the entire hotel is called the Chase, and there used to be live TV feeds back in the 1960s, and 50s. It would just simply be called Wrestling at the Chase, and it was all fake wrestling, and basically, I guess they call it the WWF now, World Wrestling Federation or something, but that stuff still goes on to this day. Only now they hold it in these gigantic, cavernous auditoriums, like hockey arenas, where you can get 10,000 people in there, and they have all these superstars. And I think that we all famously also know that our President Trump used to be involved to some extent with that whole scene, mostly just as sort of a personality, and I don't know, maybe he was personally invested in some of the sport, as it were. But they used to have Wrestling at the Chase Hotel in St. Louis. And one of the local wrestling stars and regional and local stars was, let's see, what was his name? His name was, he was called Dick the Bruiser. Let me see if I have my story right. Let's see. I might be confusing him with another wrestler. Let's fast forward just a bit. This particular wrestler was actually a union butcher, and he would butcher in some of the same stores that Gene, who made this violin, would also butcher at. And let's see. See, about, yeah, it's almost coming to me here. The name of that butcher. It's see. It'll come to me in a minute. But I mean to tell you, that butcher, the stories that Gene told us about that guy was two or three cylinders short of a V8, man. He was not running on all cylinders. Of course, if you'd had your head bashed in over many years and you'd gotten stomped on and thrown around in a wrestling ring for so many years, that might knock something loose sooner or later, to where you there might be aspects of your behavior that might not be, shall we say, conventional or orthodox. I've got one of my customers is an extreme fighter. He's put on some years now, but he'll still do, a couple of fights a year. But there was a time when he fought much more frequently than that, back when he was in his 20s. He's a 40-ish now, and believe it or not, he'll still occasionally do a fight. We're talking extreme fights. They get in those cages and they beat the shit out of each other. I don't even think they don't use boxing gloves. I think it's bare-fisted, if I remember. And I think there are different levels to those extreme matches. And I don't even think they wear any kind of a helmet or anything. It's pretty savage, actually. But he used to do that kind of stuff. But he also has bought several nice violins from me and bows. And he actually plays the violin here in Tucson, Arizona. You can scarcely believe it. You can't make this shit up, folks. So anyway, Butcher Boy Blassie. Butcher Boy Blassie was the name of the wrestler. I don't remember what his actual first name was, but he was called Butcher Boy Blassie, as I recall. And boy, this guy was some weird ass dude, man. According to the stories that Gene would tell us about him, he was quite risque and telling dirty jokes to women when they would come up to the butcher counter. And I mean, it was pretty. He was a pretty strange dude. Anyway, Gene was a master butcher, and he still. One time he showed us he took a blade, like a long kitchen knife, and he had the sharpening rod, and he showed us. He just demonstrated how he would hone the blade in preparation to work on some cuts of meat. And I mean, I tell you, he was like a goddamn fucking samurai, And his technique was just incredible. He still had it after all those years. He was a great guy. So anyway, he makes this violin, varnishes it with this varnish that was about the color of old, rank, funky ass dishwater, and I ended up because I had become friends with Gene. Through the shop association, I became quite enamored of the violin, and I asked Jeff if he would sell it to me, which he did, by the way. Okay, I've got my story slightly wrong. Jeff did not own this particular violin. He owned several other Deuits violins, but not this one. Yeah, this one here, it just came back to me. This one here, I haven't thought about this stuff, folks, in 20 years or more. I bought this one directly from Gene, and I think I gave him $400 for it. and he was quite happy with that. That's what it is. Yeah, I bought this directly from Eugene Deuits. Now, unfortunately, at the age of 78, not very long thereafter, Gene took sick with stomach cancer, and he became hospitalized, and he decided to undergo a very risky operation, which basically would have removed his entire stomach, and they would have hooked up his esophagus, I guess directly to his lower intestine somehow. I think is how it was supposed to work. And of course that he would have to, modify everything that he would eat, and needless to say, it would change his life radically. So the big day for the operation came, and I want to say it was mid-morning. I got a call on my cell phone at the violin shop, and it was Gene telling me, "Mark, I just want to let you know I got through the operation, and I'm here, resting in my room, and it all seemed to go pretty well, and they did the whole thing, and I just wanted to let you know that I made it through, and I'm okay." And Gene, thank you so much for calling me, Gene. That means a lot to me that you thought to call. And I found out that later that afternoon he had passed. He didn't make it. It looked like he was going to come through, but something happened. Something went wrong, and God called him back home. So now fast forward to some period of time. I don't know. I think it was probably a couple of years, as I recall. I was still working at the shop, of course, but I actually used Gene's fiddle to play a couple of gigs every so often, just little street gigs, But that fiddle, man, it had such a weird look to it with that varnish that it literally begged to be called by some kind of nickname. I don't know. It could have been one of our violin maker buddies out in eastern Missouri, whose name I won't mention right at the moment. But I think he's the one that came up with the nickname the Chop. And he just called this fiddle, always referred to this violin as the Chop, because it looked like a goddamn fucking pork chop. So it was called the Chop for many years. Many years. We all just called it the Chop. And you know what? This Chop back in those days, it actually sounded pretty goddamn good. It had a surprisingly pleasant tone. And in fact, it sounded better than a bunch of our violins in our shop, in the, shall we say, $1,000 to $3,000 range. It sounded better than a bunch of those fiddles. It had quite a nice tone. We were never ceased to be amazed at how nice the tone was of this fiddle. Somebody would grab the Chop and walk to the other side of the violin shop, far across the way out into our showroom, and play some stuff on it. And just the sound of that fiddle coming, about 20, 30 feet across the shop would always surprise us, at how good it sounded. And so, but you know, something happened in my mind uh, one day, and I decided that I wanted to put a nicer varnish on this fiddle. My boss at the time, Jeff Seitz, he had mixed up and cooked his own batches of oil varnish, uh, which was very fine stuff. Had quite a nice look to it that he used on his own violins, and he agreed to let me use a small quantity of it to revarnish this fiddle, and I did, and that's what we see now here today. It's kind of a sort of an amber color, honey colored. But I'll be honest with you, I was a dumbass to ever revarnish it. It wasn't long after I revarnished it that I immediately regretted it. I regretted it. You know, we all do dumbass things in life that we feel remorse for, or we regret having done. I don't know that there's a human being on earth that hasn't experienced that feeling. Why did I regret it? Because I had just destroyed something that was so wonderful and unique to Eugene Deuits himself. That was the varnish that he came up with, that he made specially to varnish this fiddle. And even if it did have a funky ass weird look to it, and it was still his varnish, and it was a part of the original instrument. And God damn it, Mark, I should have left it alone. I should have left it alone. I would love to be able to be gazing upon this old funky ass fiddle from old Eugene Deuits, and be gazing upon that old pork chop varnish. But it wasn't meant to be. I was young and dumb, and full of you know what. But such as it is, shall we draw a few notes out of it with a bow? Sure, why not? All right, let's see. Let's play a little tune here. Yeah, yeah, the old chop violin. So yeah, I revarnished it and then regretted it. Um, I over the many years that I owned the violin, I did different setups on it. I ended up sort of having a bit of a love hate relationship with it. There were times when I liked the sound of it, times when I just didn't care for it much. It just wasn't. It didn't have enough power. Uh, I was playing a lot of dances back in those days, contra dances. I needed a powerful fiddle, man. Uh, when I'd be reaching for my go-to fiddle, it had to be a ball buster, man. It needed to have the horsepower and the bite and the volume, to cut a microphone or just cut a room for the dances that I was playing back in those days, of which I did many, 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 many um, for many years. 32 years actually. Uh, I played dances for the St. Louis Child Grove Dance um, group back in St. Louis. 32 years. So, I owned lots of fiddles back in those. I've always owned lots of fiddles. And the old shop here just happened to be one that just kind of got pushed to the side ultimately and forgotten. But it got taken out. Let's see, after I moved here to Arizona, I pulled it out of storage and I decided, fuck it, I'm going to try something experimental on this violin. A little bit experimental. See how funky the corners are on this fiddle? We're talking churning urns of burning funk here. Just kind of crude. To the untrained eye, this may look like a fairly nicely made violin with fine woodworking and so forth. But when you actually look really close, the fiddle is, shall we say, lacks some refinement in certain areas. Now, I'll be dead honest with you. The scroll was another thing, by the way. Just like the varnish, I wish I hadn't done anything to the scroll, but the scroll was very funky, very asymmetric, rough around the edges. And it was, of course, we're talking a 78-year-old man that had carved this scroll. And given his age, he actually did quite a better than average job of carving the dang thing, with Jeff Seitz' help, of course. I cleaned up the scroll, pure and simple. After there was a point at which this was right before I revarnished the fiddle. I decided to recarve parts of the scroll, even them out, make it look more uniform, and the scroll actually looks very similar to the scrolls that I would make for the scroll that I made for my own violin that I made right around that time. But it also looks very similar to some of the scrolls that I made for violins in the shop in the course of certain repairs that I was doing and restorations. But this, I can assure you that Mr. Deuits did not have the skills to create a scroll this nice, though he tried. He tried his best. But here again, just like the varnish, I wish I'd left the goddamn scroll alone, and just so that it would have exhibited every nuance, every mistake, and every little, misappropriation of the gouge that Gene might have given it. I wish I had left it all alone and just left that dishwater varnish on the thing. But you know, it's all water under the bridge. I'll play one more little tune, and then we'll bring this video to a close. I'm trying to think if there are any other stories about the chop that I'm overlooking that might be of particular significance. I did use it once in a fiddle contest, but I only came in fourth in the contest. My boss, violin making boss at the time, Jeffrey Seitz, he came in second, I came in fourth, and some other, I don't remember who it was, but somebody else won the whole contest and beat us both. But I used the chop to enter that contest just for fun. And the chop just, it didn't quite, it didn't, it just didn't, it didn't have the chutzpah to sound all that great in a contest setting. But you know, who gives a shit? You know, that's all, whatever, indeed. So I ramble on and on. I was starting to mention that. I would say it was about 8 years ago. See, there was this feller in Philadelphia, owns a shop there. His name starts with a P. I can't think of his name right offhand. He patented his own bass bar contraption. Now, the bass bar, of course, is the tone bar that's glued on the underside of the top, and it goes right underneath the G-string foot of the bridge, and it's usually about 11 inches long. Well, what was this feller's name? He patented a new type of bass bar construction, and I actually tried it out on this fiddle. But it's not just, you can make a few modifications to the existing bass bar in any fiddle, but then what you do is you add little blocks of wood on either side of the bar and glue those in. I think there's three different blocks of wood on both sides of the bar, and they apparently, you know, there's allegedly some type of intelligence behind exactly where you place these little blocks of wood, and then you make some notches in the original bar. You carve some notches down north and south of the bridge, you know, so forth and so on. He alleged that he could make any violin sound 100%, 50 to 100% better than it was at the time through the addition of this new bass bar system. And heaven forbid you would do any such thing to a really nice violin that already sounded good, or even didn't sound all that great, but was a super, super nice violin that, you know, there are certain levels of violin instruments to which it would be, in my humble opinion, inappropriate to apply such a, you know, an unorthodox modification. But I actually did it to this violin. What I can say is this violin was sounding kind of wolfy, very unbalanced and uneven. Some notes would wolf out louder than others. It just was, it was not pleasant to play. It was in a bad place. So I decided to do something a little bit radical. And so I did all that to the interior, and it's still in there. And the result is that it kind of calmed everything down, which one might actually it doesn't take a freaking genius to see that if you add extra blocks of wood around the bar, and if you add that much extra mass underneath the bridge area, it's going to have sort of a dampening effect, which is kind of one and the same as saying that it will have a like a compression effect. It will smooth out the wolf notes, and but it will also have, tend to mute any notes that might have too much sharpness to the tone, or too kind of like trebly sounding. Make the whole sound of the fiddle a little bit more sort of dark and velvety, and it did have that effect on this fiddle. So I just kind of left it in there. I did that work about four or 5 years ago, and I just kind of left it alone. Let's play another tune here and just be done with our little talk about the chop. All right, let's see. Here's a tune that comes from the Deuits String Band in Salt Lake City many years ago. This is a tune that they were known to play back in the 1970s and 80s. Sorry, folks. Long ago. And they I actually heard them play the tune at a bluegrass festival that my band was also hired to play at in Park City, Utah. Quite a high-end ski resort now. It even was back then, back in the late 70s, but it was also the hangout, a groovy hangout for lots of nomadic hippies and crazy mountain folks who were fond of hanging out in bars and getting drunk on their asses and hanging out in the mountains and cruising around the Colorado Rockies, or I should say just the Rocky Mountains in general. Of course, Park City is in Utah, and you have plenty of mountains in Utah, boy, all over up there. You got the Uintas and the Wasatch Mountains, and Park City was quite a location, quite a party town, man, quite a party town. The plenty of bars, plenty of liquor, plenty of women, plenty of cocaine. Had it all, and boy, did we have some fun up there. Boy, howdy, did we have some fun. Woohoo. Oh boy. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. So the Deuits String Band was hired to play up there at the festival. They played this tune on stage. They had a great show. Hardcore strictly old time fiddle tunes and Western cowboy type songs. Fantastic musicians. Ron Kane, Skip Gorman, a couple other fellers there. Just great players. They blew my mind, actually. Lonesome Train comes directly from them. Lonesome Train. Played on the chop. Made by Eugene Deuits. St. Louis, Missouri, 1993. And folks, thanks for listening in to my long tale about the old chop violin. I appreciate you sticking with me here for some of my stories. I'm just an old guy out here in the desert, man. I don't have that much runway left ahead of me before I run off the end of the runway and end up going toes up in a fiery crash. Yeah, I'm just an old guy out here that likes to reminisce about some of the stories associated with some of my violins. So if that kind of thing is of any interest to you, my channel here would certainly be of interest to you to investigate a little further, because just about all my videos have something or another to do with stories associated with the violins that in my collection, which changes quite a bit from time to time, but also stories about the makers of the violins and just other observations and insights about violins and violin making itself. So anyway, thank you all. I love you all so much. I really, truly do. From my heart. Take care.